I'm Chris Jones from Middle Tennessee Electric in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Welcome to Along Those Lines.
Support for this podcast comes from NG North America. NG delivers safe, reliable, and cost-effective energy solutions that meet customer needs over the long term and contribute to a carbon-neutral economy. Visit ng-na.com to learn more.
Hi, everyone. This is a podcast about electric cooperatives, the work they do, and the challenges they face. I'm your host, Scott Hoffman. The Environmental Protection Agency's proposed power plant rule is set to go into effect in the spring of 2024. This sweeping set of new restrictions on emissions from new and existing power generation facilities is being criticized by many in the industry for setting unrealistic timelines, relying on untested technologies, and ultimately threatening the affordability and reliability of electricity at a point when national demand for electric power is set to skyrocket. Here to discuss this new rule and the electric cooperative response to the EPA is Ashley Slater. She's NRECA's Vice President for Regulatory Affairs. Ashley, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on. I know this is a busy time for you.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, why don't we start off with the rule itself? What is it and what does it say?
EPA's proposed rule limits greenhouse gas emissions from new and existing fossil units. So we're talking about gas and coal units. The proposal hinges on two technologies, hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, that are simply not commercially viable and not adequately demonstrated.
So that's the high level, and I hesitate to ask you to get into the head of EPA, but can you talk about some of their motivations for bringing this proposed rule forward? What do they say they're trying to do?
Well, the president has been very clear with the American people that he and his administration are really looking to transform the electric sector with the goal of getting to a carbon-free utility sector by 2035. Because the more durable legislative pathway is not an option, the president is really using EPA and its statutory authority to leverage what I'm calling, and the Supreme Court is calling, an ancillary section of the Clean Air Act, Section 111, to reach this goal.
And yeah, you mentioned the more durable legislative avenue. That obviously it's always better to get a law passed than it is to try and make law through the agencies. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Fresh new legislation when you're coming into office as the president is always the best way to go because it's new statutory authority focused on a particular policy outcome. If you're not able to get the votes through the Congress, then you really have to take inventory of your statutory authority under existing law. And that's what has been done in this case.
As part of this rulemaking process, EPA went out to the public and said, you have a certain number of days to file formal comments. NRECA has done that, extensive comments. Talk a little bit about what we asked for in those comments and what was sort of the case that we laid out to the EPA against this new proposed rule.
It was a quick 75-day comment period. The first thing I'll note is that it was, yes, a very quick comment period in a similar rulemaking, the Clean Power Plan. Listeners may remember the Obama era, and that rule got 165 days worth of comment period. We were on a very quick time frame. Originally, it was 60 days, and we actually sent several letters into the agency saying, give us more time to get arms around this. So throughout that 75 days, we were working with a bench of legal experts, a bench of technical experts, but ultimately we asked EPA to withdraw their proposal because they tried to mandate technologies, hydrogen and carbon capture, that are not commercially viable, not adequately demonstrated, thus violating the tenets of the Clean Air Act. The other thing I'll point out, which is really important, and I want to make this clear because it's kind of sometimes a sleeper and it is hard to describe, but when EPA is looking to mandate technologies that have not adequately been demonstrated or that are not commercially viable, you're forcing a decision-making process for asset owners and operators. If they can't adopt these technologies within the timeframes mandated, then they're forced to shut down. And when you're looking at assets that are always available, or what we call baseload assets like gas and coal, when you're in a position where you're forced to shut down these assets, you've got to think about how to replace them. And what EPA wants to do by pushing the needle to get to this clean energy sector by date certain is they want to get utility operators to replace these always available assets with intermittent generation that is carbon free. And wind and solar are great forms of generation. But when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, they don't perform from a capacity perspective in the same way as the always available resources like nuclear, like gas, like coal, like hydropower. So we really made the point about the need to adequately replace the generation that EPA is looking to essentially shut down.
So I know a big part of the argument we made centered on what you were just talking about, the reliability side. There's also an affordability side that sort of cascades down from the top all the way down to the ratepayers. Can you talk a little about the argument that we made in that regard?
So reliability, safety, and affordability, I mean, those are the tenets of the cooperative mission. And again, when you are pushing an outcome that forces utility, owners and operators to make the decision, do I try to transition to these technologies that aren't available yet, again, unworkable, or do I shut down these assets? You've got to replace them somewhere, and costs come along with that. And it's not just costs for the asset owners and operators, the G&Ts, but there's a domino effect through the distribution co-ops and to those that we serve at the end of the line. That's why one of the tenets of our regulatory process across the board is always making sure that regulatory actions that the agency takes are cost effective. And so that's what we have done within this set of comments.
So in your conversations with the EPA, it sort of seems that they would certainly know that these technologies are not available right now. Is the idea to just sort of pass this rulemaking and just hope and pray that the industry figures it out? Is that the strategy?
Well, this is a campaign promise that the president made. The president was very clear with the American people that his administration was going to come in and push policies that get to a particular goal. And for our sector, that's 100% carbon free by 2035. And in order to do that, the political appointees that he's put in charge of these agencies have to find a way. They have to take inventory of their existing statutory authority and find a way to get there. This is the administration's shot at that. And it's all consistent with the president's campaign promise for the utility sector. So it's not surprising.
Let's pause here for a word from our sponsor, and when we come back, we'll talk with Ashley about the behind-the-scenes work she and her team have been doing on the EPA rule.
Along those lines is made possible by NG North America, who wants you to know that electric cooperatives can reduce operating costs and improve sustainability by deploying Solar Plus energy storage solutions. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, there's never been a better time to invest in these resources. Visit ng-na.com to learn more.
I'm Samantha Kuhn from Paulding Putnam Electric Co-op in Paulding, Ohio. You're listening to Along Those Lines.
Welcome back.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes in your shop, in the government relations side and the regulatory side. When these rules come down, I assume you are sort of covering the landscape, talking to the G&Ts, talking to statewide, maybe talking to other trade associations. Can you give us sort of a sense of how that builds when you're writing up these comments and coming up with a strategy to counter a massive proposal like this?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question because the legislative process is a process that all of our members are intimately familiar with. They come once a year and they advocate before their members of Congress as part of the legislative conference, which is so important. Well, my approach as kind of the team leader for the regulatory program is to adapt a similar advocacy approach, I'm going to use that word again, to trying to influence the executive branch agencies. And responding to regulatory policies through the public comment period is part of that. And so what happens is the federal agency puts their proposal in the Federal Register. We get a certain number of days to respond to that along with other stakeholders. And what we need to do is connect, in this case, the legal, the policy, the technical expertise with the practical impact of those rules to the members. And so our area of specialty is really kind of the policy side of it, the legal again, the policy, the technical expertise. But to really make an impact with the agency, you have to make sure that you're marrying up all of those elements with, okay, well, how does this really impact our electric cooperatives and those that we serve at the end of the line? And so much of this effort within a very short period of time, again, in this case, 75 days, was trading drafts, trading outlines, receiving input from the members, integrating that input into our comments, talking to other trade associations. Where the American Public Power Administration, APPA going to be? The munis? Where are the IOUs going to be? And so there were so many elements to getting our comments together, but that sort of gives you a sense of what that behind the scenes work looks like. We also wanted to make sure that our members were well educated along the way into what this proposal does. So we actually sent out a form letter for all of our CEOs to weigh in with EPA if they so chose to do as well. So a lot of different parts and pieces to this type of comment period and response, but hopefully that gives you a little sense of what was going on behind the scenes in a very short period of time.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the things our listeners might be thinking is, you know what, I thought we heard about this rule back in the Obama era, like 10, 12, 15 years ago, and then it came up again during the Trump presidency. Give an explanation to our readers about our listeners about why this is still going on. Why are we still debating and talking about this particular rule?
EPA has been trying without success to establish greenhouse gas emission standards for the utility sector under the Clean Air Act for over a decade. And EPA has failed to essentially develop a legally defensible approach because, like any law passed by Congress, the executive branch is limited in how far they can color outside of the lines of statute, particularly when making policies of vast political and economic significance. Listeners may be aware of the major questions doctrine. They have to be able to demonstrate how their interpretation of the law is in line with the statute that Congress passed, the elected officials passed and directed. So that's been a real challenge, like I said, for over a decade. And when you're trying to do something through existing statute, like transform the entire energy sector, you have to do it in a legally durable way. And the agency just hasn't been able to figure that out.
Give us a sense of what's next. I know the rule is supposed to be finalized sometime in spring of next year. We filed our comments. What happens now between those comments and the time that EPA steps up and says, okay, this is the rule, and this is what it's going to be going forward? What do we do during that period?
We submitted our comments on August 8th, and the agency received over 1 million stakeholder comments. So what the agency has to do as part of the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act is they've got to go through all of those comments, and they've got to be able to demonstrate how between the proposed rule and the final rule, how they've taken all of those comments into consideration and address in public record, again in the Federal Register, how they drew that line between what they proposed and what they finalized. So that's why it takes so long, and that's why it's likely that we won't see a final rule until April of 2024. So in the meantime, we are going to continue to discuss the proposal with the membership. I'm going to be at the regional meetings talking about this, receiving feedback from the members. We want to understand in an ongoing fashion the impact to them on cost and reliability. And we want to also get them involved in having discussions with their elected officials, because although it's a regulatory process, the EPA is funded by the Congress, and administration officials have to go up and defend their budget and defend their decision making. And so it's really important that our members, along with us, are talking about their concerns with this rule. And then when the rule is final, we'll have to take inventory of the changes that the agency has made to see if they listen to us, if they made some changes that are helpful. And then we're going to have to assess the next steps from there. So that's sort of where we are.
Yeah. And you mentioned reaching out to the members and getting them sort of up to speed. What do you see as the value in terms of, we have a wide, broad, geographically, ideologically broad membership. What is the value of us sort of raising the level of awareness and education about this rule among those members? How are we able to turn that into sort of policy advancements on our side?
I think the more that our members engage in how policies, whether it's legislation or regulation, impact them and those that they serve at the end of the line, is just really good governance. And as a trade association that represents these members, it's our job to make sure that we are good advocates for the cooperatives, for the cooperative business model, for reliability and affordability and safety, the tenets that everybody can agree on. One of the things I want to say is that this is an EPA proposal that we're concerned about because it's unworkable and it violates the tenets of the Clean Air Act. But I want to be positive for a minute. On the sort of positive side of the ledger, we're not just saying no. This is not about just saying no. We say yes to a lot of things, and we are innovating. And we are transforming our systems as individual communities. You talked about the diversity of our membership, see fit. Our members, and part of the beauty of our business model is that our members get to decide what's best for the communities they serve. And so one of the things that we've been advocating for are these sort of transformational incentives and tools that Congress, by the way, has passed as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, massive amounts of money that if our members believe it makes sense for them, they can take advantage of new direct pay tax credits to innovate their systems. They can take advantage of the billions of dollars of clean energy grants like the one at USDA, the $9.7 billion grant program just for electric cooperatives. They can take advantage of all the IIJA or bipartisan infrastructure dollars that are there for the taking. And we are encouraging our members to do that, again, if it makes sense for their systems. So it's not just about saying no. It's about saying no to a mandate or a proposed mandate that is unworkable, that is illegal. And so I just want to make that clear that when there are opportunities to say yes and to use all of our advocacy tools to give our members the ability to do what makes sense for their systems, we do that. But when an agency comes out and does what the EPA is proposing in this case, we have to put our foot down.
Yeah, it's such a good point, and I'm glad you brought it up because I do want to get a little bit into the sort of that local control because this is clearly a monolithic policy coming from the highest levels of government and basically being applied to everyone. Can you talk a little bit about why? And you have gotten into this in your comments a second ago, but how important is the local aspect in terms of solving this problem? Because you said it yourself, we're not just about saying no; it's about getting there in a reasonable way, which works for each individual community. How are co-ops, sort of leaders in that particular regard?
Co-ops are doing awesome things, whether it's EV integration, and I'm going to step out of the sort of electric side, but in making sure that rural Americans have access to broadband. We're doing amazing things kind of on the distribution side with smart meter technology, with all the demand response that we're working on, with grid hardening. And so across the board, our co-ops are innovating. But, before I took this job at NRECA, I was working at a G&T, PNGC Power, shout out to PNGC out in Portland, and, was able to be sort of around that table as decisions were being made. And I got to tell you, the commitment there to making sure that the decisions that were made were in the best interest of the communities being served. I mean, that is what our folks do. They come to those board tables, they roll up their sleeves, and because they live in the communities they serve, they are able to make the best decisions, again, whether it's on the energy side, the broadband side, protecting species, protecting our area, our service territories from catastrophic wildfires. We do all of that, and we do all of that without really necessarily having to be pushed by Washington.
Well, I mean, you certainly have your work cut out for you. You guys have done great work so far. I read the comments; they're really well done. I hope you come back next year in spring and give us an update on how it's going. But thanks for coming on, Ashley. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been fun having this discussion with you.
And thanks to you, our listeners, and to our sponsor, NG North America. To learn more about the EPA rule and to access NRECA resources, visit cooperative.com/EPA111. For more on this and other podcasts, visit us on electric.coop. Until next time, for Along Those Lines, I'm Scott Hoffman.
I'm Mimi Valerio from Oregon Trail Electric Co-op in Eastern Oregon. Thanks for listening to Along Those Lines. Subscribe and rate us on your favorite podcast app.